So yes, we are Gorayan, and there's the spelling for you in case you were wondering and wanted to search for it. Okay, so as I said, this is a clock app for Android. A nice still shot there, which is a bit more reliable than the phone was. Um, so to start off, who are we? So my name is Dane. I'm a software engineer and did most of the coding for this project. Basically, my interest in this, in addition to being a Myst fan, was to try my hand at Android development and also have a project that could show people sort of outside of what I do for work.
Do you want to say where you work?
No.
No. Okay. So I'm a longtime Myst fan, and I actually got into my career because I really liked the graphics that were all involved in this. So I became a designer, a digital designer, and I've wanted for a really long time to have some sort of timekeeping device that would run in the Myst time, like it's described in the books and the game. And so we teamed up so that we could do this together. Like I would do the design part, and Dane would do the development. So we looked at a few different sources for ideas of how the interface should look for this. We looked at the timepiece that was illustrated in the books, and kind of describes like the algae cycle, the light cycle a little bit. The idea that the phases of the day were sort of marked out on the face of the clock. We looked at the clock in Cavern. Once there was a clock that was shown in the Myst games, we had an idea of what Cyan had pictured for a clock. And we also looked at the pod clock app and the polar clock app, if anybody remembers that. It was for keeping track of surface time, but it had this nice radial design, and the time would tick around the edge like an analog clock, but it would have this very brightly colored digital display that would change colors as you went around. And with the pod clock, the really nice factor with the pod clock is how each band gives you a sense of like what the environment is like at that pod. So you're kind of reminded of what it would be like to be there. You can imagine better what time it is there. And we also, so I'm a Midwesterner, and I spent a lot of time growing up at the Indianapolis Children's Museum, and they have this beautiful water clock in the front lobby. It's 3 stories tall, and it has all this piping, and water flows down from the top and filters through. You can see these are minutes on the side and hours on the other side, and the bulbs like fill up with water over the course of the day, and then at noon everything is full of the water from the tank at the top, and it all drains out the bottom. So when you get back to 1, you're down at the bottom of the bulbs again. So we really liked the very like visual representation of the passage of time, and the sort of joy and excitement when time rolls over. Like when you hit noon, all the water drains out, and at the museum, everyone like gathers around to watch this exciting event. And we wanted a little bit of that excitement for our app, maybe kind of a grand vision.
Okay, so we knew we wanted to make a clock, and we knew what our visual inspiration was. Before we could start, we had to understand how dummy time actually works. So first off, dummy time is very nice and simple. You don't have any leap years for one. The months are divided but in the same number of parts regardless of the month. So here on the surface, our months have 30 days. Unless they have 31 days. Unless they have 28 days, or it's 29. You get the point. So that's complicated. You don't have to worry about that. Midnight starts at a bunch of zeros. Nice and simple there. Units are mostly base 5 or some variation thereof, like you would expect if you've played the games. I assume everyone here has. And finally, there is no Pope Gregory XIII in the Cavern, so no horrible Julian Gregorian split sometime in the 1500s. At the same time, it's not necessarily the most realistic time system. So the Denis year has a very particular fixed length that is quite handily almost exactly the same as the mean length of Earth's tropical year. It was very nice of the Cavern algae to pick a day length and divide it into that evenly. And there's no recorded way of correcting for drift if there is any. A year isn't the same length every year, days change over time. The clock, as far as we know, does not account for that. So just a quick overview of the units we're dealing with. And my apologies if I butcher any pronunciations. So the base unit we're looking at is a Gorayan. This is 1.4 seconds, not too far off from what we're used to. And things sort of go up from there. So 25 per T gives you a Gorayan, it's roughly half a minute. 25 of those gives you a Tavo, which is a quarter hour. Par Tavo is roughly an hour and a quarter. 5 of those gives you Gartavo. So it's about 6 hours, and since there's no real equivalent in our time system, we were calling this a shift during development, because remembering all these words is a bit of a pain, let's be honest. Moving on, 5 shifts gives you a Yar, which is roughly a day, 29 of those in a month, or Bailey, and finally 10 Bailey T in a Har, or 1 year.
So the way that we went about the design, combining design and development, is fairly standard. If you have a team of designers or a designer and developers, and you have to communicate between the two, where the designer isn't going to be programming how the app looks. So I created a series of design comps to show what I had in my mind of how this would look, and I talked Dane through how I thought it could behave. And you can see here the evolution over time of how, on the far side, that was how it started out. And as we started to build it, we started to improve it a little more. We added the face of the clock to make the rings a little easier to read, a little more distinct from each other. We started adding color. And at this phase, in the third phase, we have a separate color for each ring, but it was staying the same. So the inner ring was the lightest blue, and it would always be the lightest blue. But then in discussion with some initial users, we decided to add this factor where the color would tick as well as the motion around the ring. So the color of each ring actually changes as it goes around the circle. And so the last comp is reflecting that. And we also added a couple of menu buttons as we started coming up with more features and adding the list of holidays, the alarms, and we have another feature as well where you can set the time of the clock to, when you were born or whatever, and it would tell you what time it was in the cavern when you were born or whatever your setting is. So that's sort of the design evolution, and we also have.
Yeah, so while Ellen was working on the design, I was doing my best to keep up as I could. So as you can see, the early efforts were lacking in style somewhat. And it's, first incarnation, basically just a digital display under a placeholder where a dial would eventually go. But very quickly, we were able to get a dial in place. Obviously, colors are still a long way from what we ended up with. We only have one dial, so in the second image there we're not tracking months or days. Another slightly interesting thing is that here we're counting 25 guards of OT to the Yar rather than 5 parts of OT, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you can see quickly we start to get something that looks a bit more professional and more ready for publication. So in the fourth image, you can see the addition of some chrome behind the dials, add some structure there that's not there in the middle one. It just makes it look more professional and complete and uses the space more effectively. And like Ellen said, finally we add some colors, and that just makes everything better. Okay.
This is literally what was happening.
So I won't go too much into the programming details here, but just to give sort of a quick overview. So this is an Android app. It's mostly programmed in Java. We have around 3,000 lines spread over 33 packages. 33 classes and 11 packages. And I just lost the power, maybe.
Hey.
Okay. Hey. I hope you all enjoyed the intermission. I know concessions are a bit overpriced, but yeah, gotta deal with that. So as I was saying, 3,000 lines of Java spread over 33 classes. In addition to that, we have about 1,000 lines of XML, and this is used for a variety of things. A lot of that is UI layout, which is largely XML. There's other configuration stuff. Our settings menus are defined using XML, and also some basic configuration for the app, version number, string constants being used in various places. So what are some of the tools we use? Well, from my perspective as a coder, I relied heavily upon Android Studio. This is a development environment provided by Google. It's based off of IntelliJ for any Java developers out there. If you've used that, it'll be a very familiar environment. It has some nice features. It has a very nice GUI editor that allows you to basically just drag and drop elements onto a virtual display, and that's what will show up in the app. And you have to do some additional stuff on top of that to make sure things scale correctly. But it is nice for quick prototyping and getting an idea of how things are going to be laid out. This will integrate with your favorite version control software, so you can share any updates with other people working on your project. And it will kindly remind you that all the ND words you're using aren't real with nice little green squiggles. So what else do we use? Android virtual devices. Basically, Google provides tools for creating virtual Android phones on your desktop. I've only got my one phone to work with. I can only do so much testing on there. But I want to make sure this app works across a variety of Android versions and screen sizes. Having something like virtual devices is pretty handy. We made extensive use of GitHub. This is how we exchange files, versions of the code, new design updates. It's great for collaboration, and it's free, which is always a plus. And finally, Stack Overflow. Kind thanks to the internet for having all the problems I had, but before me, and asking questions about it.
For the design, we used Adobe Illustrator to do the comps, and we also used the material icons from Google, which is like this free package of icons that they put together for their interfaces and their projects. And so the buttons and things in our app, we drew on their icons for that. So what challenges did we face? This was a rough day at the office. We had to make sure that we cleaned all the pixels out of the inside of that case. So one of the problems that we faced was we wanted to display the years, which only change very slowly, and we also wanted to display the month names of like the name of the month in regular letters for reference. And we also found that the rings of the clock were sometimes hard to read, so we wanted to have we decided to have a display along the bottom that would tell you sort of in text what time it was. Also, as Dane mentioned, Android devices come in a lot of shapes and sizes, and we had to take that into account. And some of them can be pretty small. I have a small phone for my lady hands, and so the designs had to work for that, but also like tablets and things. So we ended up building the design so that it has two clock faces, and the space between the clock faces could expand for larger screens. And also, a month having 29 increments is a lot. That's a lot more increments than the 5 increments that we have for hours. So that had to be one of the larger rings on the interface, so that you could distinguish as the clock ticks along. And we also decided to go with the hours and shifts. We were thinking of working shifts because it's 5 or 6 hours, and surface hours, rather than the bell system that's described in the book. So we decided to go with those two aspects, and so we had to decide how these would impact the interface. And we decided that we had to have these two clock faces, and we had to decide which units of time would go in each one. So we had to decide whether it was going to split between shifts and hours, or between hours and quarter hours. What we decided on was to have a clock face that was for precise timekeeping, so seconds, minutes, and quarter hours, and then a sort of approximate clock face for the months, days, shifts, and hours. And that way you get increasingly precise as you move down. down the phone and also like towards the center of the rings. And it also works better that way with like the units that come in increments of 5 rather than like 25.
Okay. Jumping back to programming a bit, of the many things I could have done better, just to pick out one. Did a poor job of representing a time internally and planning how to do that. So one of the annoying things about the Dunning time system, like around service time, is that some units start counting from 0, some start counting from 1. So, minutes start at 0, days start at 1. Math is very nice when things start from 0, but you also want to display things correctly, and that means storing things as 1s where appropriate. So this needs to be reconciled internally, and basically, as I was coding this over the months, with weeks in between doing work, I was pretty much as inconsistent as possible, sometimes storing things based on how they should be displayed, sometimes storing things making math easy, and in the long run, this just led to lots of pain and heartache. So the general rule here, when you're coding something and you have a problem like this, pick something, stick with it, and most importantly, document, because you're not going to remember what you did. So looking at Android generally, it is a great platform, but it does have some quirks. So for example, the developers have done a lot of work to make sure that apps built in Android are backwards compatible. So there are a lot of different versions of Android, not everyone is on the most recent version, and when you write an app, you want to make sure it works for older phones. And they do a good job of making sure that anything you can do in the newer versions can sort of be worked around the older ones. But it is still a bit of a pain. Things don't always work the same way you expect if you want to appear the same on different phones. And also their documentation is still a bit iffy around areas like this. It's not always clear when you're reading it through their docs, like, will this feature work on, version X? Or is this even still the best way of doing things?
Yeah. All right. So we, like I mentioned before, we wanted to have a reflection of sort of what the light levels in the cavern would be based on the altitude cycle. The way that the pod clock shows kind of what the light in the pod would look like. So you can see the palette that we went with. We've got this sort of like parchmenty colors. We have what we imagined the lake altitude would look like because I'm a Mac user, so I wasn't on Myst Online when I think the altitude was actually working. So hopefully that's close. And then we also had this blue palette for contrast with the kind of orangey colors of the algae. We decided to do the ticks for the clock discretely instead of continuously. So we needed a way to show, like we wanted to have the shift ring as a gradient here, showing like what part of the day you're at, where you are in the day cycle. But then we also wanted to show like exactly what color the lake would be at a given time. So the hour ring is colored with like the time, the color for your hour and the shift. Because you could have like second shift, third hour, and it'd be like halfway. So we had to deal with that. But it made it really difficult to work with the animation of each tick and the color change because it like as it animates, it moves through all of the colors in the gradient. So yeah.
Okay, so what did we learn while doing this project? So from the programming side, this was just generally a very good project for getting exposure to Android, if that's something you're interested in doing. So we need a UI that would work across a large variety of devices. We had to do interesting things like loading custom fonts so to get the funny numerals for the dials. We have user preferences that can be saved and loaded for our alarms and other things. The alarms create notifications that show up in your notification bar. And doing this requires doing a lot of stuff with the operating system itself, registering the events, and also updating the alarms in the case that, say, the user changes their system time, and other things like that. And it's generally very easy to do things in Android, also easy to screw things up. So for instance, you can write a lot of your settings menu just entirely in XML without having to do really any programming at all. But once you start wanting to do more complicated things, like having a dynamic list of alarms with complicated UI, you have to plug that into this framework that you're using before, make things look the same, make sure that things behave in a way that the user expects. And if you don't plan ahead, it can be very easy to sort of write yourself into traps. So for example, it's very easy to make a UI in Android, and there's a nice framework for that. But maybe not one intended for use with like constant animation. So when the app was first created, like we didn't have like smooth ticks and shifting colors, and things worked very well. As things got more complicated, performance began to suffer, and there's still some work that needs to be done around that to make sure things run smoothly all the time. So yeah, generally speaking, measure twice, cut once. Have some idea of where you want to go with the project and plan accordingly. When I first started this, I had no idea like how many features we were going to add, how big it was going to get. I probably could have done things differently from the beginning if I had known where it was going to go.
All right. So one of the things that we found is the quality of design often relies on getting all your details in. So we found that the appeal of the clock got a lot better after we added easing to our animations. These graphs are an example of easing. You would be familiar with it maybe if you did any animation, but you can see like this is the graph of the motion, the speed I think, and you can see how it behaves in the side there. So we added easing to when it ticks. So it's kind of like when you hit the accelerator on your car, it takes a moment for your car to like really start accelerating. So yeah, the feature of the project. It's called open source for a reason.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on this, and we do hope to do some more work going forward. But we would also like for other people to contribute. There's a lot that can be done, probably new features we haven't even thought of yet. So if you have ideas, let us know. If you want to write code, let us know.
Something like an iOS app, please.
For example, something like an iOS
Anybody
app.
is an iOS programmer.
But other things that need to be done, there's still bugs lying around, performance updates that can be done. One big thing is moving the rendering for the clock sort of out of the main UI thread into its own process, and that should make things run a lot more smoothly than they are now. And another big thing is making the alarms actual alarms. So right now, the alarms show up as notifications in your notification bar. That's all well and good, but really when you think of an alarm, you want some cacophonous racket that wakes you up at 6 in the morning, which we currently don't have. So, you could give that to the world.
All right. So we're about out of time. So if you have any questions, we have a couple minutes, but we did want to thank Cyan and Rawa for their work in giving us the gift of Myst and all of the work that goes along with that, and Rawa for bringing the timekeeping system to the world. We wanted to thank Ram Plus for help with answering questions about timekeeping and clocks, since he's like the time master. I forget what his title is, but he has some sort of official title about that. Sorry. Okay. And we wanted to thank the people that gave us likes and +1s and so on social media. Thank you for that encouragement, and for to all of you for listening to our presentation. We're not affiliated with Cyan. Do you have a question?
Are you considering making a widget?
So the question is, are we considering making a widget?
It's a good idea. It's not something we've looked at yet. Again, just the priority's been getting the main app working. Again, it's something that maybe we could do, but also again, if someone else knows how to do that, wants to contribute, that would be great.
Yeah, I don't know that either of us have the technical know-how for making like a widget, but if anybody else does, we have our project on GitHub, so you just need to get in contact with us. Same goes for iOS developers.
Another big thing would be if anyone has experience with Android Wear. Like there are actual watch Android devices out there. It might be cool to have this on.
All right. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, thank you for listening.